"You can move your ceremony to the backyard," my future mother-in-law said, sliding my wedding contract across the table like it meant nothing. She didn't even look up. Just pushed it toward me with 2 fingers, the way you push a receipt you don't want. "My name is Vanessa Hale. I'm 34 years old, and I built everything I have from scratch. I'm a photographer. Not the kind people hand expensive cameras to at fancy parties. The kind who showed up at 5 in the morning to shoot venue walkthroughs, who drove 2 hours for a sunrise session, who edited until midnight just to deliver perfection on time. I started with a second-hand camera and a free website. No investors. No family money. No safety net. Just stubbornness and early mornings. Growing up, I shared a 2-bedroom apartment with my mom and my younger brother. The walls were thin, the heat was unreliable, and my mom worked double shifts at a hospital laundry just to keep us fed. I watched her sacrifice quietly, without complaint, without performance. She never asked anyone to applaud her for it. That taught me something important early: real people do the work and keep moving. They don't wait to be recognized. I met Caleb at a wedding I was shooting. He was charming, thoughtful, and patient in a way that felt completely sincere. He opened doors, remembered small things, showed up when he said he would. I fell for that version of him fast and completely. What I didn't understand at the time was that version only existed when his family wasn't watching. His family was something else entirely. His mother, Patricia, ran the household like a stage production. Everyone had a role. Everyone knew their lines. And Caleb's younger sister, Elise, was the undeniable star. Elise was beautiful, effortlessly social, and absolutely adored by every relative in the family tree. She posted 100 photos a week and every single one was curated, filtered, and performing. Patricia treated her like a trophy. Caleb treated her like she was delicate. And I was, from the very first day I walked into their house, measured against her and found lacking. Patricia never said it directly. That wasn't her style. She would say things like, "Elise always hosts the most beautiful gatherings," while looking at my thrifted blazer. She would say, "We have a certain standard for family events," while handing me a glass of sparkling water I hadn't asked for. She was subtle enough to deny it and consistent enough to be undeniable. I paid for most of our wedding myself. The venue deposit. The photographer contract, which I negotiated carefully even though it felt strange negotiating something in my own industry. The floral consultation fee. Caleb contributed where he could, but his income was unsteady and his family constantly redirected his finances toward family priorities. I didn't complain. I had worked hard, saved carefully, and I was proud of what I'd built. But Caleb's family acted like every decision was theirs to make. Patricia suggested vendors I hadn't asked about. Elise offered opinions on my dress before I had even started looking. And Caleb, whenever I brought it up, would smile and say, "That's just how they are. They mean well." I wasn't rich. I wasn't glamorous. I didn't have a family name that opened doors or a background that impressed anyone at Sunday dinners. But I had something they never thought to look for. Years working luxury events had given me an education no university offers. I had watched wealthy families implode over inheritance arguments at rehearsal dinners. I had photographed charity galas where the biggest donors were also the quietest con artists. I had learned, slowly and thoroughly, how people hide catastrophic secrets behind perfect smiles. I knew what performance looked like. And I knew exactly how to wait. If you've ever been looked down on because of where you came from or how much money you had, this story is for you. If you know what it feels like to sit across from people who've already decided you're not enough before you've spoken a single word, I see you. That particular kind of pain is quiet and sharp and it stays with you longer than the loud kind. And if you've ever stayed silent while someone took something from you, not because you were weak, but because you were still figuring out whether fighting back was worth it, I get that too. Subscribe if any of that hits close to home. Drop a comment and tell me about a moment someone underestimated you. I'd genuinely love to hear it. And if you're ready to watch someone stop being polite and start being precise, click hype. Because that part is coming. The first sign of what was actually happening came during a family brunch 3 months before the wedding. Patricia was on her phone more than usual, and Elise was whispering to her about timelines and guest lists in a way that felt urgent. I assumed it was about Elise's relationship with her long-term boyfriend, Devon. They had been together for 2 years, and the family had been hinting loudly about a proposal for months. I didn't think much of it until I got a call from the venue coordinator 2 weeks later. "Ms. Hale," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I'm calling to confirm the date adjustment for your booking. We have you updated to a new date in October, but I just want to make sure everything is correct on your end before we finalize." I froze. "I didn't request a date adjustment," I said. A pause. "We received a change request last week. It came through with your account information." I asked her to hold the change and called Caleb immediately. He said he didn't know anything about it. He said it was probably just a system glitch. He said I shouldn't worry. I drove to the venue in person that afternoon. The coordinator pulled up the request. It had been submitted with details only someone close to our account could have known. The original date had been crossed out. A new one had been entered. And the event name had been quietly changed from our wedding to a private celebration. I had the original signed contract. I had the bank transfer confirmation for the deposit. I had every single piece of documentation, because I am a photographer and documentation is the foundation of everything I do. When I confronted Patricia directly that evening, she smiled. She actually smiled. "Vanessa, there must have been a misunderstanding. The venue was always going to need some flexibility. Elise's celebration is very important to the family right now." Caleb was in the room. He said nothing. The family dinner that week was when things became public. We were all seated around Patricia's long dining table, the kind with a centerpiece nobody moves and chairs that cost more than my first camera. The room smelled of garlic and candle wax and something floral I couldn't identify. Elise was sitting directly across from me, and she was in a mood that could only be described as victorious. "Honestly," she said, loudly enough for the whole table to hear, "that venue was a bit wasted on a small wedding anyway. It's better suited for something with real scale." Several relatives laughed softly. Not all of them. But enough. I looked at Caleb. He picked up his fork. Over the following days, I discovered the family had been quietly contacting relatives and implying I had lost the venue booking due to financial trouble. They weren't saying it to be mean, they would have said. They were just explaining the situation. The story spreading through the family was that I couldn't afford to keep the deposit, that the venue had to be released, that these things happen. It was clean and plausible and completely false. The argument that finally broke things into the open happened at Patricia's house during what was supposed to be a casual planning afternoon. I arrived to find several family members already gathered, which was strange. Patricia stood at the kitchen counter with the energy of someone who had rehearsed her lines. She announced, with the full audience she had clearly arranged, that I should be grateful to be marrying into a family with the resources and standing they had. That most people in my position would be thankful for the help. That perhaps I was being unreasonably emotional about a scheduling issue. The room was still. Someone's coffee cup clinked against a saucer. A chair shifted. I left. I was already outside on the front step, the cold air pressing against my face, when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Patricia's sister-in-law, Aunt Carol. She was the quietest person in that family, the one who observed more than she spoke. She touched my arm lightly. "The engagement party was rushed," she said, barely above a whisper. "Devon's parents have been asking about money. Specifically, money connected to the family company. They want to see financial records before they agree to the engagement. Patricia needed something impressive and fast. That's why she needed your venue." I stood very still. "It was never about you," she said. "It was about keeping up appearances for people with actual leverage." She went back inside. I stood there for a long moment, the pieces rearranging themselves into something I could finally read clearly. The betrayals didn't slow down. They accelerated. Within a week, I was removed from the family group chat. I found out through Caleb, who mentioned it casually, like it was a minor administrative update. "Mom just felt the planning coordination was getting confusing," he said. Elise, meanwhile, began posting photographs of the ballroom online. Beautiful ones. She tagged the venue, described it as the perfect setting for a perfect celebration, and positioned herself as the person who had discovered it. Not a single post acknowledged that I had booked it, paid for it, or spent months planning around it. It was simply hers now. Her followers responded enthusiastically. Her engagement content was already performing well, and the venue pictures accelerated it. I watched this happening in real time on my phone while sitting in my car outside a client's house, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Then Patricia contacted my vendors. My florist called me, confused and apologetic. "Someone called the shop and asked to discuss canceling your arrangement," she said. "They said there had been a change of plans and you had authorized the call." I had authorized nothing. My catering contact received a similar call. My rental company, the one providing chair covers and table linens, received an email from an address that was almost identical to mine, with one letter transposed. I documented every single one of these attempts. The dress appointment was the moment that made my hands go cold with something close to controlled fury. I had scheduled it months in advance at a boutique I genuinely loved, a small shop run by a woman named Irene who had been in the industry for decades. I arrived to find Elise already there with 3 of her friends, all of whom Patricia had apparently invited without telling me. They browsed freely, offered commentary on everything I tried on, and made loud observations about budget limitations and practical choices whenever I gravitated towards something I loved. One of Elise's friends held up a dress I had been considering and said, with a bright smile, "Oh, this is very sweet. Very affordable looking." Irene, to her considerable credit, quietly moved them to a separate section and continued helping me without acknowledging what had just happened. I bought her the nicest coffee I could find on my way home. Caleb and I argued more frequently now. Each time, he would reduce what was happening to misunderstandings, to family stress, to the difficulty of managing strong personalities. Each time, I would try to show him documentation, and he would say he believed me but still wouldn't act. His go-to phrase became, "I'll talk to them." He never did. Or if he did, nothing changed. I began to understand that Caleb's silence was not neutral. Silence in the face of someone's humiliation is a form of permission, and I had been extending him too much grace for too long. I started paying closer attention to the conversations happening around me. I had always been peripherally aware that the family's financial presentation didn't quite match their actual behavior. Patricia drove a very expensive car but complained constantly about costs. The family business, a property management company, was often referenced in vague, evasive terms. Elisa's lifestyle content suggested a level of spending that seemed disconnected from any visible income source. I began noting things. Not aggressively. Just carefully. The way I had learned to notice details in a frame before pressing the shutter. Elise found me alone at a church community gathering 2 weeks later. The gathering was for a local charity the family supported publicly and enthusiastically. In a hallway, out of earshot of others, she looked me directly in the face and said, "People like you should know your place. You're not what this family needs. You never were." I looked at her calmly and said nothing. She seemed unsatisfied by my non-reaction. She walked away. That night, I sat at my desk for a long time. I almost called the wedding off then. Not from sadness exactly, but from a very clear-eyed assessment of what I was about to walk into for the rest of my life. But I kept coming back to one thought. I had worked too hard and paid too much to simply disappear. I wasn't going to be erased quietly. I was going to be the one who decided how this ended. I had recently been contacted by someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. His name was Mr. Whitmore. He had retired from practicing family and business law but still consulted occasionally. He had been at several events I had photographed for the family over the years, and he had watched the Calloway family, as he referred to them, from a careful distance. I agreed to meet him for coffee. What I had learned about myself over years of photographing private events was that I had developed a habit I never consciously cultivated. I documented everything. Not just visually. I had a tendency to save emails, screenshot odd exchanges, and keep detailed notes after events where something felt off. It was a professional reflex. When you are responsible for capturing someone's most important day, you develop a near-obsessive attention to detail and a habit of creating redundancies. Nothing gets lost. Nothing gets deleted until the project is fully closed. Over years of photographing events connected to the Calloway family, at their fundraisers, their anniversary parties, their business celebrations, I had captured things I was never meant to capture. Conversations in hallways while I was adjusting a lens. Arguments that erupted briefly at the edges of rooms I was working in. And photographs, dozens of photographs taken in rapid succession during live events, that sometimes framed people in moments they assumed were private. I had also saved emails. Some had come to me directly, CC'd by mistake. Others were forwarded by contacts who had assumed I was involved in planning decisions. I had kept all of them in a folder I had labeled simply family events, and I had not reviewed most of them in months. When I finally sat down and went through everything, what I found was significant. There were audio clips from a voice recorder I had occasionally used to capture ambient sound during events for slideshow editing purposes. One of those clips, from a business dinner I had documented 18 months earlier, contained a conversation between Patricia and another family member about moving funds between two company accounts to present a cleaner financial picture to outside investors. The conversation was brief but specific. Account numbers were mentioned. Amounts were mentioned. The word temporary was used in a way that suggested it was not temporary at all. I listened to it 3 times. Then I called Mr. Whitmore. He arrived at our second meeting with a yellow legal pad and the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for an opportunity like this for a long time. He had stopped working with the Calloway family 4 years earlier. The reason, he told me quietly, was that he had been asked to help obscure a debt obligation in a way he was not willing to put his name near. He had walked away and said nothing, which he admitted with visible discomfort was not his most principled moment. He reviewed everything I had. He read the emails carefully. He listened to the audio recording twice. He looked at several of the photographs I had flagged. He looked up at me and said, "This is serious." He explained that what the recording appeared to document was financial manipulation that could expose the company to significant legal liability. The email supported a pattern of behavior, not just isolated incidents. He knew, from his prior work with the family, what the existing structure of the business looked like and how the pieces I had found connected to it. Meanwhile, Patricia was moving forward with total confidence. She posted a video of the ballroom decorated for Elisa's engagement celebration. She tagged vendors, thanked generous family friends, and gave a speech to camera about how excited she was to celebrate her remarkable daughter. She invited business associates. She invited community figures. She created a guest list that appeared designed to impress Devon's family and demonstrate financial and social credibility. Caleb called me the day before the event and asked me to please not do anything that would make things worse. He used the word peace 4 times in a 3-minute conversation. I thought about what peace had looked like for the past year of my life. I thought about the dress appointment. The vendor calls. The family chat I had been removed from. The relatives who had been told I couldn't afford my own wedding. The contract with my date erased. I told Caleb I was attending the event. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Vanessa, please." I hung up. The night of Elisa's engagement celebration was warm and still, the kind of evening that felt deliberately beautiful, as if the atmosphere itself had been arranged to impress. I arrived at the ballroom, my ballroom, the one I had paid a deposit on and planned my wedding around, wearing a dress I had bought for a different occasion entirely. It fit perfectly. I felt nothing except calm. Elise spotted me from across the room and her expression moved through several stages quickly. Surprise first, then amusement, then the particular smile of someone who believes they have already won. "Oh," she said, gliding over, "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. Are you here to congratulate me?" "I'm here for the evening," I said pleasantly. She laughed and moved away. Within minutes, I noticed a security guard had been quietly positioned near the entrance of the room I was standing in. Patricia's doing, clearly. I found a seat near the back and waited. The speeches began around an hour in. Devon's father stood up and said something gracious and warmly received. Patricia followed, glowing, confident, performing beautifully for the room full of guests she had assembled specifically to witness this. She spoke about family legacy, about the importance of honesty in relationships, about building something lasting. The irony was so precise it was almost artistic. When she finished and the applause settled, I stood up. The room noticed immediately. Not loudly, but in the particular way a room notices when something unexpected is about to happen. Heads turned. Conversations paused. I said, calmly and clearly, since we're all here celebrating honesty and family tonight, I think we should talk about the missing money. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Whitmore entered through the side doors 30 seconds later, exactly as we had arranged. He carried a folder. He was wearing a suit that said he meant business, because he did. He had contacted 2 of Devon's father's business associates in advance, people who had financial interests tied to the Callaway Company. They were in the room. They had been waiting. I played the audio recording through a small Bluetooth speaker I had placed at my table earlier in the evening. Patricia's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable, discussing account transfers and the word temporary in a context that was immediately recognizable to anyone with business experience. The room erupted slowly, like something catching fire in stages. Devon turned to Elise. His expression was not angry. It was the much worse thing, which was completely blank. Mr. Whitmore stepped forward and offered the documented records to Devon's father directly. The man reviewed the first page standing up, and the color of his face changed. Guests began speaking to each other. Then to the family. A woman near the front asked Patricia directly about the accounts mentioned in the recording. Patricia did not answer calmly. She looked around the room, and for the first time in all the months I had known her, she looked genuinely unsure of herself. Then Caleb pushed through to where I was standing. "Vanessa," he said, and his voice had the edge of someone who had suddenly decided to have a spine. "I should have stood up for you. I know that. I'm sorry. I want to fix this." I looked at him for a long moment. "You had every chance to stand beside me before the room turned against you," I said. "This isn't fixing things. This is just changing sides." He didn't respond. Patricia found her voice again. She turned toward me and, in front of every person she had invited to witness her daughter's triumph, she screamed that I had ruined everything. That I was vindictive. That I had come here to destroy her family out of jealousy. I waited until she finished. Then I said, clearly enough for the room to hear, "No. I stopped pretending your lies were love." The ballroom came apart quietly after that. Devon's family gathered near the exit. Business associates exchanged numbers with Mr. Whitmore. Arguments erupted in corners. Elise stood near the decorative floral arch that had been erected for the evening's photographs, and she looked, for the first time since I had known her, very small. I walked to the venue coordinator, who had been standing near the service entrance watching all of this with an expression of controlled shock. I placed my original signed contract and my bank transfer confirmation on the table in front of her. "I believe this is still valid," I said. She looked at it, looked at me, and nodded. I left the ballroom. I did not look back. I cancelled the wedding the following week. Not in anger, not in grief, but with the quiet clarity of someone who has seen a situation completely and made a decision accordingly. Caleb called several times. His messages started as apologies and slowly shifted into explanations about his family's pressure and how hard things were for him. I read them carefully and wished him well and moved forward. My photography business grew in the months after. Not because of the ballroom night specifically, but because the people who knew what had happened, and some of them were clients, watched how I handled it. They saw someone who documented carefully, acted deliberately, and didn't collapse under pressure. Several reached out. A few became long-term clients. One introduced me to a corporate events firm that changed my business entirely. I heard from Aunt Carol that Elise's engagement ended within weeks of the celebration. Devon's family, after reviewing the financial records, withdrew from the relationship. The family business faced scrutiny that eventually became formal. Patricia was quiet in a way I had never previously associated with her. Former clients I had photographed for years, people who had watched from the outside, sent private messages. Not many. But enough to matter. One woman, a retired judge I had photographed at 3 separate fundraisers, sent a note that simply said, "Well done." I thought about loss for a while after everything settled. About what it meant to lose people, to lose a relationship, to lose the version of a future you had spent months building toward. And what I found, when I sat with it honestly, was that I did not feel the particular hollow grief I had expected. What I felt instead was space. Room to breathe. Room to build something that did not require my silence as a foundation. I had spent so long trying to earn a place at their table. Trying to be enough, to be acceptable, to make the gap between where I came from and where they stood narrow enough to cross without embarrassment. I had bent myself into shapes that did not fit me and called it patience. I had absorbed insults and called it maturity. I had stayed quiet and called it being reasonable. The moment I stopped asking for that seat was the moment I understood I had been building my own table all along. The moment I stopped begging for a seat at their table was the moment I finally built my own. If someone has ever taken credit for something you worked hard for, I want you to know I believe you. I know how disorienting it is to see your effort repackaged as someone else's achievement. I know how much it costs to stay composed while that happens. And I know that the people who smile in your face while quietly undercutting you are often the hardest ones to confront, because part of you keeps hoping you're wrong about them. Have you ever stayed quiet too long just to keep peace? Drop it in the comments. I think a lot of people in this community have that story, and it deserves to be heard. Subscribe if this resonated with you. Share it if you know someone who needs to hear it. And click hype if you want this story to reach more people who've been right where Vanessa was. Your story matters. Especially when the people around you have spent years trying to convince you otherwise. Every comment you leave, every share, every hype helps someone else feel less alone in an experience that can feel incredibly isolating when you're inside it. If you've had your own version of this, I'd love to hear it below. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for being here. And thank you for listening.